Well, again, Madam Mayor, members of the council, thank you for hearing me tonight. I'm going to be, as you know already, giving a presentation regarding housing in the city of Temecula. We're going to discuss many things tonight. And I want to set some ground rules, give you a sense of what the presentation is going to be like before we get into it. And the first question, of course, is why are we here? And of course, that was because it was at council's request. Most basically, but I also think that it's a confluence of issues and timing, and it is good timing for a presentation like this, for a discussion like this to begin. Of course, we're in the middle of what many consider to be a serious housing crisis, which it is, which is primarily a shortage, and we'll discuss that. But it's also a good time because the general plan is underway. A major component of that is the housing element, which is in process right now. The drafting of the 6th cycle housing element is underway right now. So, and I know we've as we've just heard, we've been receiving considerable community feedback and concerns regarding the housing issue, and for good reason. So it is good timing. And in terms of the presentation tonight, it is a receive and file, but that doesn't mean that, of course, there's not going to be vigorous conversation about the different issues that I cover. And I'm going to cover multiple topics, from the housing crisis to the history of housing production in the city of Temecula, the regional housing needs assessment, as well as Ms. Lamont's proposal and other concerns that her group has raised. I provided breaks, so there's different sections in the presentation tonight, and I have provided breaks at the end of each section for council discussion and questions, because it is a very long presentation. I do apologize for that up front, but there's just a lot to cover. So I will break, and I will turn it over to the mayor for questions and comments at that time. And you're going to see a lot of data, a lot of graphs. But I just wanted to mention that this is not an academic exercise. All of the data that we're using is readily available from Housing and Community Development, the State Department of Finance, other state sources. We're not trying to make any kind of empirical argument here. We're just trying to be the messenger of the data as it exists today. And the discussion is a broad, high-level analysis. So there's not one particular point that we're going to drill down all the way down onto. I think that's for future discussions, and I think that this really is the beginning of the discussion as we kind of move into the public outreach portion of the housing element primarily. This is a foundational kind of presentation to kind of look at where we've been, look at what we've done as a city over the last 30 years or so, so we can have that foundation as we look forward to the next chapter, as we develop the housing element over the next year or so. So, like I mentioned, there's five key sections that we'll be going through tonight, talking about the housing crisis, and very importantly, we'll be talking about the state of California's response to the housing crisis in pretty extensive detail. And then we'll be talking about Temecula's historical market rate housing production, Temecula's historical affordable housing production, and that's in quotes, because that's, when I say affordable and it's in quotes, that means somehow it's a government subsidized, rent restricted type of development. And then finally, we'll be talking about the community concerns and proposals that have been put forth by Ms. Lamont and her group. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump into the first section, which is a broad overview of the housing crisis, which is really a shortage. And it doesn't seem like you can go very far these days without a headline about the housing crisis. Every single day, just about, there's something in the paper about some new law or some new issue pertaining to the housing crisis. You know, it's so prevalent that even Wikipedia has a page on the California housing shortage. I thought that was sadly humorous that there's a page regarding that. And it is really before COVID showed up, it was the #1 issue for the state of California in terms of their legislation that they were moving forward, and their focus and the amount of money they're putting towards it. And it was the #1 issue before COVID, and when COVID's gone, it'll be the #1 issue when it's gone. So the key question, of course, is how did California end up with a housing shortage, right? This is the key question. And to understand that, I think we have to go all the way back to our very first econ class we ever had, the very first day, where we talked about the ideas of the concept of supply and demand, and that's really what the housing crisis boils down to. So let's talk about the demand side first, and this is really the demand right here. California population, it has been increasing pretty steadily since 1940. The post-war population growth has been essentially linear. It's been growing about 5 million people per decade, and we're supposed to top out this year around 40.3 million people. Now, that's a lot of people. It's the population estimates are continuing to increase through 2045, although they do slow down. So we probably won't see this linear growth over the next decade or two. But that is the demand side. It has been steady and increasing for 70 or 80 years. So what about the supply side? And this is where the problem really begins. So what are we looking at here? This is a graph showing California home production from 1954 to 2016. So this is the modern era in California. Single family homes production per year is represented by the orange bars, and multifamily is represented by the blue bars. So this is all housing production per year. And if you remember back to the population graph, it was a pretty even or consistent growth pattern since 1940. So you could assume that the state would need to produce an even number of units per year to meet that demand. And the state of California's Housing Community Development has pegged that number at 180,000 units, or roughly about there per year. And that black line you see there represents that 180,000 unit threshold, and that's just to meet demand every single year. So what do we see? So from 1954 to 1989, we see many years in surplus of demand in production in California. And it's almost 2-to-1 years surplus to deficit. And if you smooth this out and filled in all the deficit years with the surplus years, you actually end up with a slight surplus from 1954 to 1989. So that's a healthy market. That's a market in equilibrium. But what we see starting in 1990 is a complete disruption of the housing supply, development and construction cycle. It just completely fell off. And you see a huge deficit from 1990 to 2016. And obviously that's just the latest data that we have on this slide. It's continued. We haven't reached the 180,000 unit threshold since 2004 and 2005. And just a note, 14 of 15 years below the 100,000 unit production mark have been since 1990. 7 of the 8 lowest years since 1954 have been since 1990. This is really the seeds of a housing crisis. They call it a housing crisis, but that's a little misleading, because a crisis is like COVID. COVID came out of nowhere, it shocked everybody. We all had to react with limited knowledge. This has been in the works since the end of the 80s. So what is the result of housing underproduction? Well, first, the state has estimated that there's somewhere around there's a deficit in units in the state of California of around 3.5 million units right now. That's just to meet demand right now. That's not moving forward. Now there's argument about whether that number is correct, but some say it's lower, but the official state line is 3.5 million. And that has led, of course, to the highest in nation price appreciation over time. So this graph is just showing the median home price in 2015 dollars. And what you see is from 1940 to 1970, price appreciation grows proportionally with the rest of the country. The dark bar is California, the light bar is the United States as a whole. And once we get to 1980, which tracks with the graph we saw before when production fell off, you see massive increases in price appreciation relative to the rest of the United States. What we see here is median home value. You see the top 25 states here by population. This is their median home value. So this is the US average, and this is California. It's more than 2.5 times the national average. This is all stuff we know, but it's good to go over it and really take a look at it and see how long this has really been going on. So that's just on the market rate side. That's just housing production in aggregate. But what about affordable housing under production? You know, and I think I should mention again, affordable housing is government subsidized residential development that is rent or purchase price restricted and tenant income based. So I just want to, I'm going to repeat that throughout because I don't want there to be confusion with technically affordable and what's affordable to me. Those are two different things. So there has been underproduction in affordable housing. In fact, California Housing Partnership put out a report, and their claim is that of the 3.5 million units deficit in the state, 1.4 million of those are needed for households that would qualify as low income, meaning those households can't afford market rate units. So why is there underproduction of affordable housing? Well, the same macroeconomic forces that are pushing on market rate are also pushing on affordable housing development, with one key difference. Affordable housing relies on state funding, state, local, counties, or city funding. And what we see here is a chart showing the sources of state funding for affordable housing from 2008 to 2019. And you can see local redevelopment agencies, which the city had, and which the city used very vigorously to produce affordable housing, was investing at $2.5 billion across the state per year in affordable housing. In 2012, redevelopment agencies were eliminated, taking $2.5 billion a year in investment down to zero. And as you can see, as you go through time to 2019, there hasn't been anything close to a replacement of those funds. You see a slight increase here in 2019, but upon closer examination, that the majority of that increase is from ballot propositions and additional taxes, which includes tax measures not available to all cities. So for example, LA passed a $1 billion proposition for affordable housing. That money is included in this graph, but only available to the city of Los Angeles. So it's a little misleading. That's basically it. The funding source for affordable housing has been completely eliminated. So just in summary, for the housing crisis portion of the presentation, it's the seeds of the housing crisis is a supply and demand issue. Steadily increasing demand, massive deficit in production over 30 plus years. The supply side has led to huge increases in the home prices. And the elimination of funding for affordable housing without any kind of substitute has obviously led to the lack of resources to produce sufficient subsidized units, whether it be for sale or whether it be for rent. So Madam Mayor, that concludes the first section of the presentation. I'll turn it back over to you for discussion and questions.
Okay, gentlemen, any questions?
I do got a question.
Go ahead, Stu.
Yeah, so maybe Luke, you can answer this. If there was an affordable housing element for the city of Temecula, would it be something that we could restrict to only Temecula residents? You know, because that's my whole thought here is if we did some sort of affordable housing, would it be something that we would because my industry, the hair industry, is exactly the people that we're talking about. It's exactly those people who are, you know, in that lower income strata. They're not going to make $125,000 a year, and yet they're struggling to fight to keep up with rental increases. So you know, I totally hear what they're saying, and so, but again, I don't know if it's within our power to be able to force an industry to accept our demands on that property or that, you know, so it kind of walk with me on that. Tell me a little bit.
So the quick answer to the question is, can the city discriminate on the basis of the Temecula residency in affordable housing? And the
right
is no.
Okay.
No. That answers that question. Another thing here is that I'm actually, you're thinking ahead of me. I have a whole section on this, which is good. So if you could bear with me, I think we'll get to all those questions, and we can talk them through along with all the other questions that have been asked. That's okay with
Okay.
So, anybody else? Zach?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just, before we get too deep into this, I want to just take a brief second to sort of acknowledge and thank Luke for doing this, right? This is a big deal. And I think it's such a big deal that for as a council, for us, these topics, I think are important for us to hear exactly what's going on, what we have done, what we haven't done, what we will do, what we can do, what we can't do. So I think the overall conversation I'm engaged in, I'm excited to hear tonight. But I certainly just want to at least take this second before we get too deep in the weeds on this to just thank you for taking the time to do this. And let's not apologize for how long this is. This is a complex problem that we have right now, and we need to take the time, we need to dig deep, and we need to look for solutions. So, we can get through this presentation, and if it takes us a couple hours, it takes us a couple hours. That's what we're here for. But again, I just wanted to, I know your shop is busy. Chair Garrio gave a presentation on everything you've done over the last year during the pandemic. And so I know you've had your head down for the last little bit getting this done. So I just don't want that to go overlooked. And I hope the community appreciates this as much as I do. And I believe that my council colleagues do as well. So I have some questions, a ton of notes, but I will sort of wait till the end to unleash all those on everyone.
Are you sure? Because we made the breaks just for that reason.
Well, I think some of the ones I have don't fit into this little
Okay.
section for Luke. I mean, on the supply side, we need to get creative, right? Like we need to absolutely get creative with ADUs, which we already have an ordinance, which we're working on plans.
Yeah.
Micro housing. We could talk about the mall.
Yeah.
What are we going to do in Uptown Jefferson? I mean, there's a lot of opportunities for us to be pretty nimble and maybe not do things, do things a little bit differently with respect to housing. One thing I will say. It was brought up in some of the comments that how density is somehow bad. People didn't flee density because of COVID. They fled because there was nothing left to do. The museums and the things that people love to do in the city, they needed some space, right? And so if you want to talk about the suburbs, which is what we are, the housing demand here in our city is off the charts right now because we have fairly large lots, a lot of pool homes, and those homes are going off the market lickety split.
Yep.
To say density is bad, concentrated poverty is bad. Density is not necessarily bad. So I just sort of wanted to acknowledge
the
that.
key, Zach, is a lot of people, they associate poverty with the people who live in affordable housing. But that was going to be my question, Luke. So give us an idea. A family of 4 can make $58,000 a year and still be considered qualified for affordable housing?
Well, it's a sliding scale, so it's a matrix. It depends on how many people live in the home, so that's a determining factor.
Yeah.
And it depends on which income strata you're talking about. 120% of AMI, area median income, 80% of area median income, and so on and so forth down the strata. But for a family of 4 at the median income, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000.
80?
Mm-hmm.
$80,000. So I think people are shocked when they hear that because they're thinking of people who, maybe are making minimum wage or $20,000 a year, or students going to school, but that's not it at all. There's $80,000 is not a salary to sneeze at either. So I think that's a misnomer that we need to better inform people of what affordable housing is. And then the people who live in affordable housing are, teachers right out of college, or, new police officers or firemen, or Stu, people who work in barbershops, and the people that wait. So they're our neighbors, really. So any other questions? Okay, we're good. On to the next section.
Okay, so the next section is has to do with the state's response to the housing crisis. So as we mentioned before, the housing crisis stage has been set over many decades. And the state began making this issue a top priority around 2015. That's when we started seeing more legislation regarding it. So of course, what it has been the state's policy reaction to housing underproduction and a lack of affordable housing funding. And frankly, we have to look back to 2015 when the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is kind of an organ of the legislature it's a nonpartisan group that makes policy recommendations to the legislature for their consideration. They made 3 primary recommendations that have largely been made into official state policy and legislation. The first was to build more housing, do it in the coastal urban areas, and do it densely. And this is the regional housing needs assessment, and I'll go into that in a few moments. The second was to spur private market housing production via legislation, primarily removing many land use decisions from local control. The state's position is that there's a housing shortage because local jurisdictions don't want to build housing. That's the state's official position. 3, instead of redevelopment style affordable housing system, the state has targeted programs that it controls for affordable housing that are targeted at very specific populations. So I'm going to go through each one of those in a little more detail. So strategy 1, which was build more housing, do it in the coastal urban areas, and do it densely. So the state's main strategy here to meet this goal is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, which I'll refer to as RHNA. So what is RHNA? I'm going to attempt to explain RHNA in 4 bullet points.
Good luck.
First, the state claims that there are 3.5 million homes that need to be built within the next 8 years. That's the state's position. The state then allocates a portion of those 3.5 million units to different MPOs or metropolitan planning organizations, which the city of Temecula is part of the Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG. That's our MPO. The state gave SCAG 1.3 million units to be produced over the next 8 years. SCAG then divides up that allocation of 1.3 million units amongst cities and counties within its jurisdiction. And just so you know, that Temecula's allotment from that 1.3 million is 4,193 over the next 8 years starting in 2022. So that's what RHNA is. That's how we got 4,193 units in the city of Temecula to be produced over the next 8 years. I think it's good to do a comparison here between the 5th and 6th cycle. We're in the 5th cycle, and the numbers I just mentioned are for the 6th cycle. So the 5th cycle, which was from 2014 to will end at the end of this year, the whole entire SCAG region got 412,000 units to divvy up amongst Los Angeles, which had 44%, Orange had 9%, Riverside had a full quarter of that allotment, San Bernardino had 14, Ventura had 5, and Imperial had 4. That's the 5th cycle that we're in now. This is the 6th cycle, and this is really representative of the state's recognition of the housing crisis. You can see that the allocation from the 5th cycle to the 6th cycle has gone up more than 3-fold. So from 412 to 1.3 million for the SCAG region. But what we have seen is a shift based on the strategy, which is build more housing, do it in the coastal urban areas, not in places like Riverside or San Bernardino, and do it densely. You see a shift in the total percentage of the allocation moving towards Los Angeles, towards Orange County. So for instance, in the 5th cycle, Los Angeles received 44% of the allocation. In the 6th cycle, they received 61%. Orange County went from 9% to 14%, while Riverside went from a full quarter down to 12% of the allocation. San Bernardino went down to 10 from 14, so on, Ventura 5 to 2, and Imperial 4 to 1. This is a recognition of the need to put housing where the most people are, where the most demand is, which is in the coastal urban areas. So again, Temecula's share of the 5th cycle was 1,493. Temecula's 6th cycle share is 4,193. I wanted, and this addresses directly the question posed by many of the public commenters. Our fifth cycle requirement under RENA was 1,493. The city has currently produced 1,714. So we're well ahead of our RENA requirement for the fifth cycle, and we still have a year left. And I think it's actually going to be the most productive housing year of the entire cycle. So we're in good shape there.
We're actually ahead of what's required.
That's correct.
Okay.
Because right there, that how many cities are able to make that claim right now within SCAG?
Not many.
No.
Not many. No, I don't think there's many that can. So, you know, like I said, we're in good shape there, and there's going to be a few hundred more before it's all said and done by the end of this year with Somers Bend and some of the other projects that are coming online. So very good shape there. Just a side note, and I don't have this data in, it's just a matter of too much data, but there's only been one housing element cycle that the city didn't overproduce relative to its RENA requirement, and that was the 2008 RENA, which of course was the time of
Recession.
the Great Recession, the housing bubble burst, basically no housing production took place in the entire country during that cycle.
So we're actually ahead of, we have been ahead of required production all along.
in the first housing element cycle, we beat it by 893%.
Wow.
So, and I can bring those numbers to the council in a future conversation so we can take a look at those. So we're in good shape here. The second strategy that the state is implementing is to spur private housing development via legislation reducing local control. So again, the state's position is that the undersupply is due to local jurisdictions' opposition to housing production. In my professional opinion, that does not apply to the city of Temecula.
No.
And we'll get into it a little bit later, but you'll see that as soon as housing dropped off in the state, that's when housing ramped up in the city of Temecula. But nevertheless, this is the city's or the state's position. And they've followed through. They have enacted copious amounts of bills. This is just a small sample of the bills that have been the housing related bills that have been approved by the legislature that do exactly what they said they would do. They reduce local control. So for example, they prohibit imposing a moratorium on housing within a city or county without HCD approval. They prohibit adopting any new subjective design standards. So that's the standards of what things can look like that the city is primarily responsible for. We can't adopt any new ones for housing. It prohibits establishing or implementing a limit on the number of land use approvals or construction permits for housing. And lastly, just as an example, prohibits capping the number of housing units that may be approved or constructed, or even limiting the city's population. So, and again, that's just an example, but you can see, you know, the intent, and it's been successful. They've done a lot to reduce control. And finally, the third strategy, which is targeting funding for affordable housing. So this is, like I mentioned, there's not, at least right now, there's no discussion that I know of re-implementing a redevelopment style funding source for affordable housing for cities and local jurisdictions. I just don't see that happening, maybe, but I haven't heard anything about it. What the state wants is more state-controlled funding sources that are allocated for narrow and specific populations. So for example, the No Place Like Home program, which is a $2 billion program, and it is strictly for homeless transitional housing. You have SB2, among other things. It has $2 billion just for vets. And there are other things too that aren't just funding sources, but restrictions on funding that we already have. So SB 341 prohibits cities or former redevelopment agencies from expending any of their residual redevelopment dollars on any project that serves any income classification above 80%. So they're really pushing us to use our money in the very low income strata categories, which is tough because if we wanted to do, say the city wanted to do a for sale workforce housing single family home product, that's typically 120% AMI income strata. That's because that's how much you would need to qualify and be able to maintain the home and service a mortgage. It just works out that way. The city can't even use its funds for that type of purpose. The
And
funds.
it's still not affordable.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
It's still not affordable.
Well, it would be affordable, but we can't use former RDA dollars to help subsidize that project. So it would be affordable to someone making 120% AMI, but we can't participate in the funding of that project. So it limits the city's control over its own money. So in summary, on the state's response to the housing crisis, we've seen it. The state has taken the legislative analyst's office recommendations to a T, and we've seen it with RENA, and we've seen it with legislation, and we've seen it with the elimination of RDA and the implementation of very strict and controlled targeted affordable housing programs that the state is now implementing. So that concludes this section, Madam Mayor, and I'll open up for discussion and questions.
Questions? I have a comment though. They have taken away the one source that we had to fund affordable housing, and we did it beautifully and consistently and very successfully, as was demonstrated, because we were ahead of the curve every step of the way. And then they further restricted it by narrowing the qualifications for particular funding. So you had homeless and veterans. Not that there's anything wrong with doing transitional housing or homes for veterans, heavens. But that's the only thing you can do, right, with those funds. So they're restricted.
Very much so.
So on the one hand, they're making it much more difficult for cities to entice developers, because that's really all we can do, is to try and entice developers to build housing that they will not make any money off of. In fact, they will lose money on it unless they can go for other sources of funding outside of the city, which would be federal dollars or things like that. And there are some builders that do that. And we have several of those units in town. So they've made it much harder for us to do it, and yet they're requiring more. And there's your government in action.
I do have a question, Madam Mayor.
Sure, Stu.
Okay, so Luke, so does additional, the ADUs, are they counted in RENA numbers? Or is that something that is considered additional housing?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Every ADU is considered a unit for
Okay.
satisfying the RENA requirement.
And let's explain what that is one more time, is that the state passed a law that said cities cannot restrict individuals in single family residences from building a second house on their property. And was it regardless of the size of the property?
No, there's minimum development standards. So there's minimum setback requirements. So it's not just anywhere, but it's most places that the standards are minimal, and they're intended to be so. And just so everyone knows, an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. It really just means a second unit on your property. State passed legislation that made that a possibility for any homeowner by right. So the city cannot say no to that.
Yep.
Unless they don't meet, for instance, a 5-foot setback requirement from the property line. And there are a few other things. It has to meet building codes, obviously, for safety, but they're very, very minimal, which is really an enticing of homeowners to build ADUs in their backyards.
But it's taking that control away from cities and from HOAs, by the way.
That's right. HOAs are prohibited from prohibiting ADUs.
Yeah. Zach?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I wanted to really sort of highlight, that last section is important. As the SCAG representative for the cities of Temecula, Murrieta, and Menifee, I've had the privilege of digesting a lot of this over the last year or so. And, there are a lot of cities, and listen, I don't want to throw other cities under the bus, but unfortunately, there are a lot of cities in our SCAG region that want nothing to do with building any more homes, right? They're just absolutely 100% against that, right? And it falls into the character of my community and property values, and a lot of these arguments are interesting, to say the least. The thing that one of the last conversations we had at SCAG was about local control. And a council member from Huntington Beach, if I recall correctly, brought it up about just the idea of if you're always saying no, the state's going to take away that local control from you, right? Like, and I don't think there's anyone on this this meeting or any of these councils that really want the state to come in and fully take that away. But then, you know, you think about it, maybe housing is one of those things that is better decided at the state level, right? Like the state regulates cars and freeways. Imagine if every city was like building their own portion of the freeway and sort of saying, well, I only want this in my town. So it's just an interesting conversation to have. I know, you know, we've met those and exceeded those numbers, those RENA numbers, and just housing in general. But I just really wanted to, and maybe this is a topic for another conversation, but just reminding folks of what that SCAG region looks like, what Southern California in general looks like from a housing production standpoint. It wasn't that long ago that Temecula was affordable, right?
Yes.
Like
right.
I came here 20 plus years ago because it was affordable, right? Like I lived in San Diego and I walked across the street and couldn't afford the house across the street, no matter how many jobs I worked, right? And so there's just a little perspective on that I think is important as well. Things have escalated exponentially to Luke's first part of that presentation. It is part of the reason why. But again, I just wanted to remind everybody what it sort of looks like outside of our little bubble and what other cities are doing, and redevelopment went away. Maybe there were some abuses in other cities and whatnot, which is probably why it went away. Yeah. So, you know, it's an uphill battle for us, but just a little perspective.
You just laid out the perfect case for supply and demand. It was affordable. I remember the time when you could buy a house for $99,000 because we've been here, what, 32 years, but
yeah. And
then we watched that go up, and that's what happened. People started buying homes, and that's when the prices started to escalate. So it's supply and demand.
To that point, Madam Mayor, you know, if my family wanted to move here now with a professional salary that my wife earns, we wouldn't be able to afford Temecula.
Yeah.
You know. And without that wealth generated over the last 20 years of being able to buy in this town 20 years ago, you know, I'd be on the outside looking in too.
And what we don't talk about is the other end of the scale. If you're seniors and you're empty nesters and you want to sell your house or your home, unless you have, you know, you're going to spend all the equity and you're still not going to find a home that it probably costs much less than the house you're in.
You hang on to that home, right? And then you have 3,000 square feet of excess space because it's just you and your spouse, you know? So,
yes. And
yeah,
you
good
know,
point.
And you hope you can continue to pay the taxes.
Yeah.
So it you know, it strikes at the other end of the spectrum too, which, not that I'm a senior citizen or anything, but. Okay, I think we're ready, Luke.
Okay.
Oh, Matt, you got one?
Yeah, just a quick one. So, you know, one of the things I think probably should clarify is that as homes are built in Temecula, be it, you know, market rate or affordable housing, there are provisions in the law that won't allow us to restrict the sale of those homes to Temecula residents, right?
Right.
Part of what we're hearing, of course, is that, you know, there are residents in our city, and we recognize this, who want to start to build their own, you know, home and you know, personal wealth and all of that. And we all know that home ownership is a big part of that that process. But there are, you know, provisions in the law specifically prohibiting us from restricting those new units. And Zach, you made a great point earlier, which was there are other cities in our region who, you know, for whatever reason are opposed to new housing development. While we've been meeting our numbers, you know, we're becoming an attractor for, you know, those communities that are not, right? And yeah. You know, I just want to clarify and make sure that I'm characterizing that properly under the law, but that's my understanding, is we don't have that authority to be able to advantage our own residents in this process, which frankly, I understand the reasons why, but it's also frustrating because, you know, we want our residents to be successful as well.
And if you look at the affordable housing that we do have, it's beautiful. I mean, nice and very well maintained. And if you didn't know it was affordable housing, you could drive by and you'd never know it was affordable housing. So yeah, go ahead, Luke. It's just very frustrating. Oh, you go, Jessica, go ahead.
So I just want to make just a quick comment here. You know, over the last couple of weeks that I've been able to drive around the city on the city bus, I've been getting my tour, learning more and more. I want to say, you know, with Luke and Greg and Aaron, they've been showing me more and more of where, you know, the affordable housing is going. It is here, it's coming, and I want people to know that it's around the corner. You know what I'm saying? It's they're building it. We're not just letting people not be able to move in here. You know, we're really taking that to heart. But I will tell you one thing that kind of came to that I was thinking about, and if you can help me with this, Luke, one of the things I think you said on number 1 for this section was like building more and densely. And I think that's where people, and tell me this, like more people are concerned with that dense population, because it's not so much the low, you know, the low income, but just the high density. And I think that's what's scaring people, because do we have the infrastructure? You know, we're at 111,000 people here in Temecula. I know I moved here, and I'm sure so many other people like, you know, like their property. They like a little bit of room. Is that going to scare people off? You know, are we going to lose our residents like Marian Edwards? You know, we don't want to lose her. But is that gonna be a problem because more people are moving in, and we're not going to have the space that maybe people want to?
Oh, you wouldn't lose. Why would you lose me?
I hope not. No, but I mean, just in general, are we going to lose our people, our residents who've been here for a long time? Who, you know, I look at people who in my district, you know, in all the Force area and Santiago Estates, they like their property, they like the space. Are we going to begin to see that we're going to lose that? And the high density in the traffic area, I think that's what's on a lot of people's hearts and minds when we're talking about high density housing. And
Jess, do you mean is zoning going to change? Is that what you mean?
well, Luke, can it change?
Yeah. I think I can address that comment. So the things we can control and the things we can't control. The things we can't control are our arena number. That's coming directly from the state. We're going to have to accommodate for that number, which is over 4,000 units in this next cycle. The things we can't control, where we prepare for those units to be located.
Right.
And we've been doing that well ahead of the state's requirements. We've done a whole host of things. We've done an Old Town specific plan, which allows for up to 50% of the built environment to be residential. We did the Uptown specific plan, which is a commercial industrial corridor, right? It's not on the east side of the freeway. It's not near our, you know, suburban tract homes or large lot single family homes. And we prepared for over 4,000 units there through another specific plan, right? We've the city council has adopted the Altair specific plan, which is in the foothills west of Old Town, and that is going to be, you know, what we consider high density. It's a multifamily development, not super high density, but more than single family zoning. So we think we have opportunities to potentially look and talk to the council about mixed use redevelopment of some of our shopping centers, right? So not to eliminate any commercial, but to add the ability for mixed use in those environments. That's something we're going to have to talk about. And that's what the next few conversations are going to be about as we move towards the housing element adoption. We think in our preliminary analysis here at the staff level that we can accommodate the 4,193 units in everything I just described and a little bit more, and that we will not have to do any rezoning of any single family residential areas.
Right.
So that's what we can control. So, and I think as of right now, I think we're in good shape to not have to mess with any of the single family zoning. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Now, Luke, last thing, can the state come in? So I know we want to cap out at about 135,000. I think you had mentioned. Can the state eventually come in and say, that's not okay with us? You need to continue to add more people and more housing.
Yes.
And force our hand on that.
Yes.
Yes.
They can. I mean, that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing now. I mean, that's the strategy, is to adding residential units beyond what our general plan had already analyzed. That 135 was from, you know, what we thought was going to come in 2005, right? At the 2035 marker. Well, as we update our general plan now, the population number in the city of Temecula is going to go up. The estimated population, the final build out population.
So even though we build the 4,000 units that are required of us, it'll just roll around again and they'll add another 4,000. That's the problem.
As long as population continues to increase, that's what I assume they'll do. Yeah, so, but we'll do our best, our absolute best to make sure that we're ahead of those requirements and produce specific plans take many, many years to produce on the scale that we've done.
Yeah.
But we can't wait for arena cycle to come around to prepare for these things. And that's why we've done it way ahead, kind of looking into the future, saying, we think this is coming. We better start preparing now. Otherwise, we're going to be flat footed when these numbers come down.
Remember, Lene and I talked about, for the planning commission, we waited how long ago? We were both on the Temecula Scholarship Foundation at the time when we were talking about Roarpaw, and that was at least 15 years ago. And you saw the map, we're just now getting those developers have just now come in and are developing that section. So it takes years, and you don't drop 4,000 units overnight, and you don't drop them all in one place. But still, we are forced when we shouldn't be, and that's what the local control issue is. Okay, Luke, go ahead and make us happy with this section.
Okay, the best. This one's a good story. This is the next. See if I can advance the slide here. Okay, so this next section is the history of housing production in the city of Temecula and the history of private market housing production. The next section will be affordable housing. So just to be clear again, what is private market housing? It's housing that is privately funded, constructed, and owned. It has no direct government subsidy. This is not technical affordable housing. This is probably the house you live in or the apartment that you're renting now. If you don't have to qualify based on your income, that's private market housing. So just to take a quick look at the housing stock, this is at the end of last year. We had a total of about 37,000 units in the city. More now, we're adding more every single day. But the makeup is mostly single family, which is obvious. It's about 78.5% of the total stock. Single family attached, so that's like a townhome style product is 3.6. Multifamily, your apartment development is about 17.5, and then we have 160 mobile homes in one mobile home park, which is less than 0.5% of the total stock. So when was Temecula housing stock built? And I think we all know this, but I think it's an important conversation to have because it is juxtaposed to the supply and demand issue I described earlier, which is at the end of the 80s, the rest of the state just fell off a cliff in housing production. And 1980 through 2018 is really when Temecula built all of its, the vast majority of its housing units. So you can see that 92%, 93% of all Temecula housing units have been built since 1980 and 71.6 since 1990. And that number is actually going to go up as we continue to build housing. So it seems to me, in my viewing of the data, is that as the rest of the state went into a complete meltdown in housing production, the city of Temecula ramped up and actually was working to be part of the solution with whatever means it was able to do, which was quite a bit. So in the 80s, there was 7,700 units produced. In the 90s, there was over 12,000. 2009, over 12,000. And then you see a drop off in 2010, 2018, and that's really for two reasons. That's the housing crisis, the credit bubble, and the Great Recession. And also, there wasn't that much land to build on. We have a few tract developments that were still left to build, but I doubt we'll ever see a 12,000 unit decade ever again in the city of Temecula. This is a natural progression, maybe not this dramatic without the recession, but we're never going to be doing something like this, I think, ever again in the future, which is a normal progression for a city. So this portion of this section, I think is really interesting. And I think the narrative that most people understand about Temecula is that people moved here for many reasons, but one of the main reasons was inexpensive housing relative to San Diego, Orange County, LA. That's a kind of a grand narrative of the city of Temecula. It has produced, you know, decades worth of affordable housing comparatively across California. And but we kind of wanted to know, you know, exactly how affordable was it? You know, was it affordable to people making 200% of the area median income because they were coming from high salary jobs in those areas? You know, what income levels was it affordable to? And was the private market, we asked the question, was the private market producing what would otherwise be considered affordable housing to low-income households throughout the history of the city of Temecula? So what we have here is, I'm going to go through a series of graphs. I'm going to try to do it as succinctly as possible. But this chart here is the median home price in the city of Temecula from January of 1990 to January of 2020. So you can see that the timescales on the bottom, and the housing cost, the median price, or the price of housing is along the left axis. So it's the median price. So it's important to mention that 50% of the homes available for sale in the market in any individual year are above this line, and 50% are below this line. This is the median. For reference, the median home price in 1990 was $157,000.
Yeah.
At the beginning of 2020 was $477,000. Now I have to caveat that I am not discounting the fact that 2020 saw massive price appreciation, and I recognize that, but that wasn't the scope of what we're looking at here. That will be for a future discussion on what's happening, you know, this year. We wanted to look at how affordable was it over time. So, you know, this is a nice graph, but I show this to people and I say, well, what is this? What is this giant spike in the middle? That's the 2004-2008 subprime lending housing bubble.
Mm-hmm.
So as we look at this, just know that that's why that weird out of place spike is there. So this is something more akin to the trend line if you kind of flattened out, took out all the craziness. So this is where this chart really becomes interesting. So I've added this line here. This is it's lavender or purple, depending on how your screen produces the color, but this line is the max affordable mortgage in any given year to a household earning 120% of area median income. And that's a specific number, a specific income category, because that is typically what is targeted for a for sale subsidized affordable housing project, where we'd be looking for people to actually buy and own the home, would be in the 120% area median income category. Important thing about this line, if the line is above the median income, obviously that household could afford more than the median income. If it's touching it, they can afford exactly the median income. And if it's below it, they can afford less than the median income. But note on the line being just below the median income, the closer that line comes to the median income, even if it's below, there are still homes available for sale in those at that income strata. It's just, you want to be as close as possible to that median income. This is a ballpark kind of analysis. We're not drilling all the way down to the individual house costs for every house for sale over this time period. So just a note as we continue to look forward here. Again, another note, the 120% area median income in 1990 was $40,000. In 2020, it was $90,000. That's for a family of four. So what do we see? So we see from 1990 to 2004, the line is basically the income, or the 120% area median income could afford the median price home. The line is above the median income line. So it's affordable to 120% area median income home household. We see the same thing from 2009 to 2020, meaning that the private market, without any government subsidy in the history of Temecula, was producing 27 of 30 years, producing on its own housing affordable to those making 120% of the area median income, which is, it's pretty incredible. So that's great, 120% area median income. We wanted to look at, what about median income households and 80% of area median income households, which 80% of area median income is technically considered low income. So we did the same, we plotted the same data. And again, it's important to know that the median area income in 1990 was 33,000, and the 80% AMI in 1990 was 27,000.
Wow.
And in 2020, the median income was 75. This is for a family of four. And the 80% AMI was 60,000 for a family of four.
So that's about what I thought.
Yeah, but you're pretty close. And what we see is it's not nearly as affordable as it was for the 120, but we do see periods, large periods, where a family or a household earning the median income or 80% of the area median income could actually afford homes in Temecula that were privately produced, non-subsidized. We see it through 1994 to about 2003. And then we see in 2009 to 2013 that even 80% of area median income could more than afford the median income home. Pretty incredible. So I think, so 15 to 30 years, homes are affordable to both the median and 80% AMI. You know, there are some years where the 80% AMIs drop below, but in terms of the median, it's pretty solid. So I think the moral of the story here is that the history of the vast majority of the history of housing production, private housing production in the city of Temecula, has been affordable to many different income strata, not just upper income, all the way down to what is technically considered low income. So just as a summary of this section, again, Temecula has produced large amounts of housing units just as the state entered a deficit of production, and Temecula market rate housing has provided relatively affordable options for multiple incomes for many, many years. So I'll go ahead and throw it back to you, Madam Mayor, for discussion questions.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Randy just handed me a note, so I need a motion to extend. And let's just go ahead and go to 11 o'clock. It's 8 minutes till 10.
I'll move to extend to 11 p.m.
Okay.
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second, and all in favor, aye.
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 Okay. Any questions on this?
Madam Mayor, I'm
go
sorry, I
ahead,
don't think you
Zach.
can see me. Yeah. I don't have a question. I just have a comment when we talk about, our market rate production. And I think there's a lot that goes into a lot of the subdivisions that we have in our city that really sort of highlight the importance of mixed incomes in the same community. So I live in Harveston, and I think when everyone hears that, they think of this idyllic, picket fences and everyone's living on sprawling estates and whatnot. But if you actually look at Harveston, there's apartments in Harveston for rent. There's zero lot line homes in Harveston. The lake homes are small lots. Our lot is 2,500 square foot lot, which is just
That's the lot, not the house. That's the lot.
The lot is a very small lot. So this dense development, there's larger lot homes, there's condominiums. And I think when you look at that, when we talk about, some of the successes that we had, I don't want to minimize any of the developments we have in our city, but there are some developments that Somers Bend will be the same way, right? There are some developments that add this mix of incomes, which it just inherently makes a stronger community, a more resilient community. So that's market rate stuff. That's just market rate housing production that is doing good things, right? And we didn't have to tell, we didn't have to say, oh, this is what you need to do. This is a good thing to do. So no question, just really wanted to highlight that specifically.
Well, it gives the potential to sell more homes too. I mean, the more diversity you have in the price ranges, the more people you're going to attract that can afford each of the different levels.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it gives someone a starter home and they can get in, definitely.
Or now, remember, it's the senior citizens too.
Well, there's senior facilities over there, so you can come and be my neighbor.
Yeah, who are going to downsize and want a nice home, but it's just smaller.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Matt, I'd be interested in what you think of the charts and the data. You're Mr. Chart Man.
Oh man, I've got so much to say. I'm gonna hold back my shots for later and share all my thoughts at once.
Okay. Luke,
But-
are you drinking Dr. Pepper or anything? I mean,
I got my coffee. I'm good to go.
need a little, okay, then let's go.
Good. Two more sections. So that was market rate affordable housing production. This is a shorter section, but it is about the Temecula's history of affordable housing production. So this is subsidized rental and for sale.
Mhm.
So again, what is affordable housing? It's I've gone through this. It's housing that utilizes a government subsidy of some type to finance the development of a residential property. It's rent and or sales price restricted, usually for 55 years. So we wanted to take a look at, how did the city of Temecula stack up against our peers in Southwest Riverside in terms of affordable housing production or units that are available to the community. And we can see here that Temecula has produced the most of all the local cities, with the closest being Lake Elsinore at 511. So the city of Temecula is at 804 as of today. This is kind of an interesting chart, and it's a ratio of deed restricted affordable housing units to population. So the key here is the shorter the bar, the better. And we see that Temecula has one affordable housing unit for every 143 residents. And if we compare that to our sister cities who are closest in population, City of Marietta has one affordable housing unit for every 472 residents, and Menifee has one for every 430. So maybe fourfold better than our peers on that metric. So I talked about the reduction or elimination of RDA funding earlier, but what did the RDA do, the city's RDA redevelopment agency, do with the money it had when it had a funding source? So I'm going to go through a little bit of the construction of affordable housing that's been done and a couple other programs that I think are pertinent to discussion tonight. So this is the cottages of Old Town. I'm not going to go through all of them. There's too many to go through. I just picked a cross section. Cottages of Old Town. This is built in 2003. There's 17 units. They're for sale, owner occupied, and available to moderate income buyers, which is 120% of AMI. And some of the buyers of these homes use the RDA's first time home buy program, and the RDA invested $1.5 million in these 17 units. Now here's a different unit, but Cottages of Old Town. Habitat for Humanity 1, built in 2003, 2 units for sale. Of course, that's the Habitat for Humanity model, available to low-income 80% AMI folks. The RDA had a modest investment of $80,000 in these 2 units. Habitat for Humanity 2, which is kind of around the corner, it's 5 units. This is one of the units for sale to low-income 80% AMI buyers. The RDA invested $502,000 in this project. The Dalton 2 project, which is in Old Town, this is a rental project, 24 units of low income, 80% AMI, above restaurants and salons. It's a mixed use project. RDA invested $3 million in that project. Right next door is the Palomar Heritage, which is a added 22 80% AMI rental units, and the RDA invested $3.3 million in that project. This is the Portola Terrace project over on Poodle, 44 rental units, low and very low, which is 80% and 50% of AMI, so a deeper affordability. And the redevelopment agency invested $5.5 million in that project. So this is a before picture, and many of you are familiar with this project. It was formerly called Summer House. It's over off Margaritas, across from Stadium Pizza. It was a property that fell into foreclosure during the housing crisis. This is this was the condition of the property. It was formerly, like I said, formerly called Summer House. The city stepped up, redevelopment agency with Bridge Housing bought the property. As you can see, it was half built. Bought it to turn it into an affordable housing development. This is what it looked like after the renovation was complete. The Summer House name has been replaced with Madera Vista, but it's 110 rental units available to low and very low income households, 20 units set aside for seniors, and the RDA investment was significant at $8.4 million.
And that started out as about $500,000 condominiums.
Yes, these were intentioned to be over $500,000 condominiums for seniors, actually, but it obviously didn't work out that way. So this is another picture, and this is the
Beautiful.
It's a very nice project. This is a senior project that the city did. It's 65 units for low and very low income seniors, and the RDA invested 2.6 million in that project. So that's just a cross section of the projects that we've done. Again, there's over 800 units to the city's credit in affordable housing throughout the city, but the RDA did other programs too, like the first time homebuyer program. I went through, the charts about, homes were available and affordable to, moderate income buyers. They may have been able to make a monthly mortgage, but what about the down payment? So the agency had a program while we had a funding source, provided up to $50,000 in down payment assistance to first-time home buyers for the folks buying in Temecula. The RDA spent over $500,000 on that program. And finally, one of the very successful programs was the residential improvement program, which is available to moderate and low-income homeowners in the city, up to $10,000 for a forgivable loan. To renovate the mostly the outside of the house, but if there were systems inside that need to be renovated for health and safety issues, for that too, the RDA spent about $2.4 million on that program and rehabilitated 488 homes within the city. So very successful.
It prevents blight too.
Exactly. And we have projects that are funded and in the works that the city has allocated money to. Las Haciendas, which was mentioned earlier by Commissioner Watts, is in uptown Temecula. It's been funded by the city, and we're hoping that construction can start soon. It's 77 rental units for low and very low income households, and the RDA has a significant investment in this project of $10.2 million. Vine Creek, 60 units, low and very low. 14 of these units are set aside for households with family members with special needs. And the agency has invested or will invest 2.7 million in this project, and that's a future project. And then finally, Habitat for Humanity Free, which, as you can see that red arrow pointing to the vacant lot, Habitat for Humanity 2, what is a project we're working on with Tammy Marine and her group at Habitat for another 6-unit for sale product available to moderate and low income home buyers. And the agency's it's the former agency's investment in that project is around 700,000, and that's is intended to be a joint effort, a joint venture with the County of Riverside. So just in summary, the agency has, over 800 units either built or are in the pipeline for multiple income categories. And there was a question in one of the comments, public comments, about how much the agency has invested in affordable housing. Currently, the agency has already invested 43.3 million, and we have the city and the former agency has allocated contractually another 13.7 in available funds for the projects I just mentioned. So that concludes this section, Madam Mayor. I'll turn it over for discussion.
No, that's great. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead, Stu.
So Luke, since the city is the one who, the former RDA, can we restrict those low income apartments to Temecula residents and/or people who have Temecula jobs? I mean, do we have that ability at all, or can anybody grab it?
Yeah.
No, the answer is no. I mean, generally speaking, the only way to discriminate in favor of someone in housing is if they are a protected class, a senior, a vet, someone with a disability. Something. There's a whole section of law on this, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to get into that because I will certainly say something wrong. But generally speaking, you have to be in one of these legally protected classes in order for housing discrimination in your favor, right? So we cannot make a requirement that you live in the city or that you have a job in the city. Those are not protected classes.
And they've expanded the protected classes in the last couple of years too. Anybody else? Oh, Jess, got one?
Madam Mayor, I have a question for Luke. One other thing, when people come up to me, they've been asking me, what would we lose as a city if we didn't follow along with state regulations? Can you just let people know what that looks like if we don't as a city follow along with that?
Good question. Very good question.
Yeah. In the past, it was a murky area to answer that question. I think the ultimate, in the past, the ultimate punishment would be that the city would lose its ability to issue building permits, which kind of is counterintuitive, right? That kind of works against their whole goal of getting cities to issue permits. So that was never really used. But under the new legislation that has been, adopted, that I've gone over, I didn't go over any of these bills, but there is a whole new kind of carrot and sticks state regime when it comes to enforcing on cities these rules. So the theory for the state is that they have these programs to help cities reach the targets, whether it be planning grants, whether it be affordable housing grants, things like that. But on the other side of the coin is they've actually developed a financial penalty kind of regime that, and I don't recall exactly how much each penalty is. It's something like $10,000 a penalty, but can go all the way up to $600,000. So they've actually created a fine system, and what we saw in Huntington Beach, the state can just directly sue you and force you to do what they have dictated at the legislature. And we saw that with Huntington Beach. And I believe, unless Peter, you can correct me, I believe Huntington Beach lost that lawsuit. So the state prevailed in that lawsuit. And Huntington Beach was essentially doing exactly that. They were saying, we're not going to do this. We're not going to abide by the RENA numbers, and we're going to go our own way. Well, the state didn't like that and sued them, and the state won.
And so the fine system was just basically, so I have an understanding as well. So the fine system is, okay, we're not going to comply with the amount of housing that you want us to put in, and then that's when they tack on those fines. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you're not meeting your targets, if you haven't adopted a housing element in time, if you haven't, even if you haven't adopted housing element, if you're not meeting the goals in the housing element by the prescribed times, they're monitoring all this, in real time over years, and they're coming to the city and saying, you said you were going to do this, you didn't do it. Okay, we'll help you do it, but even if with the help you don't do it, well, we do have the ability to find you.
Wow.
So yeah, that's kind of the new system. I haven't seen it done yet. Obviously, it's new. I haven't seen anybody get fined, but it's there if they need it.
We don't want to be the first either.
No.
Thanks, Luke.
You good? Anybody else? Zach.
I'll just, continue to jump in and really sort of expand on what Councilmember Stewart brought up is, we're hearing from the community, right? And sort of saying no at this point and defying the state. I don't know, that would be almost defying the residents as well. But when we talk about building affordable housing, and we certainly want Temecula residents to be able to live there, right? A whole other component of this is, again, and I don't want to throw any other cities under the bus, but the reality of not all cities are building affordable housing at the rate they should.
Right.
So, well, we might want to build something and for our local workforce, the reality is that someone could be working in Corona and live in Temecula, right? Because, well, we've created this wonderful community down here, and you look at Madera Vista and you're like, well, that's amazing, I'm going to go live there, right? But you're not even working here anymore. So, it's really this, and I've tried to have these conversations with some folks in the community of, this is not a Temecula specific problem. It's not even a California problem. It's a national problem at this point, and it takes these larger solutions. We can't just one-off create, massive amounts of units and think we're going to solve all those problems for residents. People will continue to come here from all over. And I just really want to highlight that, because it is this reality of like, well, we want to all be in this together, which is why we're part of SCAG. But not everybody's sort of playing on that same playing field. I, again, just try to acknowledge the realities of a regional plan. Everyone needs to be doing their part.
But unlike years past, there are consequences now. You know, there just didn't used to really be consequences, but there are consequences now. So that'll be some protection for us, but yeah, you can't restrict. You know, you can't pick and choose who moves in, other than they have to qualify, you know, under the affordable piece.
Yep.
And again, we've said for a lot of years, we're victims of our own success. And we provide beautiful homes in a beautiful community and beautiful affordable housing too. And people want to come here, and we can't pick and choose who comes. They just have to qualify. Are we good? Luke, is this the grand finale?
This is the grand finale.
All right.
So the final section is addressing the concerns that Laura Lamont and her group have put forward. There's three subsections here, and the first one is concerns about the warehouse at Creekside, which is a affordable housing development town. The request for an inclusionary housing ordinance, so that discussion, and then the workforce housing proposal that was put forward. So just a caveat here, this is that I'm going to do my best to translate what I think Laura was trying to say with the workforce housing proposal. And I know Laurel's probably watching, so forgive me if I don't translate it exactly as you have envisioned it, but we can certainly work on that in the future if I do get any of it slightly wrong. But I was trying to work off of her her sheet that she gave us with all of the individual details. So just wanted to say that up front. So we're going to start with the issues raised by the warehouse tenants. And just so everybody knows what the warehouse at Creekside is, it's located in Old Town on 3rd Street. It's an affordable housing development. There's 32 restricted income units in the property. The RDA did invest about 10 years ago or so, $6 million in the project. The city does not own or operate this project. They're all privately owned. The terms of the RDA's investment and the city's involvement are really defined primarily by the regulatory agreement, which mostly says, it says a lot, but one of the main parameters is who can qualify and how much they can be charged for rent. So that's the main thrust of the regulatory agreement. So, and I have to ask you to bear with me. I'm going to go through these point by point, so it's going to bog down a little bit, but I think it's important that we just hit them all. So I'm not, I don't want to be accused of missing something. So the first issue that was raised is, quote, the warehouse at Creekside tenants that appear to have had their rent raised beyond the legal amount during a pandemic and without authorization from the city. So the bullet points are kind of the staff's response. So first, the regulatory agreement, which I mentioned, requires that prior to any rental increase, the landlord must request approval from the city 60 days prior to the increases taking effect. So most of the rental rate increases requests were made timely. For those that were not, the city denied the landlord's rental rate increase for this compliance reporting year. The rental increases requested remained within the rental range as defined. The remaining rental increases remain within the rental range as defined by the regulatory agreement. This has been an interesting year because Governor Newsom issued an executive order prohibiting rental increases of more than 10%. So we had to analyze it based on that criteria as well. And from what we saw, the landlord rental increases did not exceed this limit. And finally, because the rental rate increases were within the limits established in the regulatory agreement and did not violate the governor's orders, the city had no basis to deny the rental rate increase requests. The second issue raised is, quote, warehouse at Creekside tenants have not received full reimbursement of their illegal parking fees. So the tenants rightfully brought to the city's attention that they would be charged parking fees. The city's interpretation of the regulatory agreement is that parking fees are not a permitted fee to be charged. So once finding this out, the city immediately corresponded with the landlord and demanded full refund of all parking fees charged to tenants. It is our understanding is that those refunds are in process but have not been completed. And finally, the city is going to stay engaged on this issue until all the parking fees are fully refunded. So we will stay engaged with the landlord and make sure that all of those fees are returned in full. Next issue is, quote, warehouse at Creekside exploitative practices of charging tenants rent for 2 apartments to move their family from 1 bedroom to a 2-bedroom. So city staff's understanding of this issue is that tenants may want to move apartments, but are required by the landlord to wait until the end of their current lease term before they are able to switch apartments, signing a new lease when they move. Staff's understanding is that this issue is, the issue is that if the lease term is not over and the tenant still wants to rent the other apartment, then the landlord requires them to sign an additional lease to reserve the apartment. The city staff's position is that the landlord is within his rights to enforce the terms of valid lease agreements, so long as those lease agreements are compliant with the regulatory agreement. I'm not sure how a tenant in a rent restricted apartment could qualify for 2 leases, to pay 2 leases at the same time. So that is still a mystery to me, and something that we should that I still need to get to the bottom of. Next issue is, quote, warehouse at Creekside, lack of functional essential laundry facilities. Short answer to this question is neither the city's conditions of approval for the project nor the regulatory agreement require the landlord to provide laundry services on site. That being said, and regardless, the city highly encourages the landlord, and we have communicated this to them, to maintain any and all laundry facilities that are located on site. And we agree with the tenants that if laundry facilities and machines are provided, they should be kept in good working order. The problem for us as staff in the city is we have no regulatory requirement for those services to be provided. The next issue is the warehouse at Creekside capitalizing on new tenants to increase profit. I wasn't sure how to answer this, but I'll just be direct. So long as the landlord is administering the property in accordance with the regulatory agreement, then the landlord is within his rights to take on new tenants at landlord's discretion. And I believe this is the final issue raised in regards to the warehouse, which is, it kind of crosses over. Quote, the critical need for an inclusionary housing ordinance, especially as it relates to AB 671. So I'm familiar with AB 671. I'm not sure how it relates to inclusionary housing. AB 671 mandates that local agencies include a plan that incentivizes and promotes the creation of accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, that can be offered at affordable rent for low, for affordable income households, and place those incentives in the housing element. So on that issue, the city has, as we already mentioned, the city has already permits ADUs in all residential zones by right. That's a state law. And in terms of directly addressing AB 671, the city is developing standard architectural and building plans that residents will be able to use to reduce the time and cost of constructing an ADU. So in terms of AB 671, it's related to ADUs, and I believe the city is addressing the intent of AB 671. But on the issue of an inclusionary housing ordinance, what is it? It's a law that typically requires all new residential development to set aside a certain percentage of the new units constructed to be restricted for rental or sale only to the lower to 120% area median income or below. And some inclusionary ordinances give the developer the option to pay a fee in lieu of setting aside actual units. So what are some of the pros and cons? And this is not staff's position on an inclusionary ordinance. These are just some food for thought if the council would like to discuss this when I'm finished. So some of the pros are, or the main pro, which is in theory that, so long as the market rate housing market is financially healthy, more residential development will be produced, and along with it will come more restricted affordable housing. That's the primary goal. Some of the cons that we've seen or read about is that the potential to raise the cost of market rate housing, as the inclusion of affordable housing in a market rate development typically, not always, I can't say it always, but typically those are a financial loser for the developer. So they must be subsidized by the market rate unit. So they have to raise the rent or the housing price for a market rate unit. And the problem there is that typically hurts the entry-level rental or sale buyer more than it does at anyone else, because the higher you go up the income strata, you know, a $14,000 fee for to pay the in lieu fee for the inclusionary housing ordinance for someone buying $1 million home. Well, they're going to pay their broker 4 times that much money just to buy and sell the house. They'll just put that into the loan. But if you're $5,000 within being able to buy the home or not, that's where it can actually become a problem for the entry level buyers. So there's some issues to be discussed there. Strangely enough, we don't see it as being necessarily a favored strategy by the state of California for inclusion in the city's housing element. We've heard this from our consultant who's working with other cities who have been talking about including inclusionary housing ordinances. And another kind of way to look at this is we've seen a flood of housing legislation, everything under the sun. We have not seen a piece of legislation requiring an inclusionary housing ordinance. So I think that's kind of telling to the state's stance on them. Now, they're not prohibited, of course, but they are restricted by a new law, AB 1505, which I think is kind of like a passive aggressive way of keeping cities from doing it. Because if you pass an inclusionary housing ordinance that will require more than 15% of any development be set aside as affordable, you have to produce a economic impact report that shows that the inclusion of those units will not raise the cost of housing in your community. You have to submit it to HCD, and they get to approve or deny that study. So to me, that's a way of the state saying, we don't favor these, you can still do them, but you better prove to us it's not going to raise housing costs. So that's just interesting insight that we've kind of learned over the last few months. Interestingly, the city has a inclusionary ordinance already. It doesn't cover the entire city. It's called the Affordable Housing Overlay Zone. It was a requirement of the housing element cycle we're in now. We call it the HOZ. And it is an inclusionary ordinance over a portion of the city that requires any new residential development that comes in and develops under this ordinance it requires 20% affordable for 20% affordable units from the entire allotment, and it has to be affordable to 80% AMI or lower. And we have 2 projects that have already been approved. They haven't been constructed, but the city has approved them under the HOZ, which total 129 affordable housing units. So that's kind of an interesting note as well. So this is the final subsection. This is Ms. Lamont's workforce housing proposal. And again, I'm just going to go through it point by point. So the objective that she put forward is, quote, to create a supply of housing in Temecula and Murrieta that the local workforce can afford to purchase, with the result that working families may live in or near the communities where they work and more fully participate in the life of those communities. How could you argue with that? That sounds great. We should work towards that. Ms. Lamont goes on to list categories of potential applicants, and I know this question has already been asked, but potential applicants under her proposal for this project include working single parents with little or no child support, workers who are also full or part-time students, young adults in their first job, couples who both work at entry-level or service sector jobs and have young children, Temecula residents or someone who has a job located in Temecula, and finally, families that have very high fixed expenses or debt due to an unavoidable circumstance, such as a prolonged illness, disability, or special needs child. Again, as I mentioned before, these are all well-deserving categories. The problem in the law is that almost all of them are not considered a protected class, and we wouldn't be able to create a program that discriminates in their favor, with the exception of a household with someone with a disability or special needs children. So that would be something that would be an appropriate legal category for an applicant and a program to be built around. So as we go through this, the red is my kind of thoughts or response to the proposal. So qualification of the applicants. So Ms. Lamont has proposed that the applicant must have a job in the jurisdiction where she applies for housing or in the adjacent jurisdiction. This is not a qualification factor that can be used to discriminate against applicants that don't meet this requirement, but would otherwise qualify based on income. This is the protected class issue again. The second bullet is the applicant and his or her immediate family must occupy the house and must agree not to rent it or any portion of it to anyone else. That's entirely allowed. That's a primary residence requirement. That's standard. The third bullet, the applicant may not own in whole or in part any other residence anywhere. This is actually fairly tricky to achieve. So it's not clear as to whether this requirement is enforceable legally. It may be. I'd have to talk to an attorney about that. But more pertinent, I believe, is more pertinent would be, does the ownership of another property affect the applicant's income eligibility? So I think that if we're going to discuss that, we would need to discuss it from that angle. So the terms of the subsidy. The proposal is that the entity managing the subsidized housing would be either a qualified not-for-profit organization, a governmental agency, or a resident governed common interest development group. So my initial reaction to that is that if the units are to be owner occupied, right? So the people who live there own the units, there would be no government entity, quote, managing the housing. And those would be those people's privately owned homes. The units would be owned outright. So just like I said, the units would be owned outright by the occupants. Now an HOA could, the group of private homeowners could get together and establish an HOA, but that HOA would be limited to similar authorities that a typical HOA would have. But continuing on with the terms of the subsidy, the value of the subsidized residence would not fluctuate with the market, but would be fixed during the period of ownership. This would ensure that the beneficiary of the subsidy would not profit from housing market appreciation, only from the opportunity to build equity. So typically in a for sale affordable development, the initial buyer qualifies as, say, for example, a moderate income buyer. When they go to sell the house, they must sell the house to another moderate income buyer. They can't sell it into the private market. They have to find a buyer that qualifies. And because area median income goes up slowly over time, the next buyer will qualify at a slightly higher income and a slightly higher mortgage, meaning that the home can be sold at a slightly higher price than originally purchased. And the difference is what is captured as equity by the current owner. So you build equity, but you don't build equity, like a private homeowner would, because you have to find a affordable buyer to sell to, and that's a challenge. Continuing on with the terms of the subsidy, any mortgage loan held by an owner would be structured so that the down payment and monthly payments would be based on the applicant's actual ability to pay. The subsidy program would establish mortgage cost ceilings, such as a maximum of 5% down and monthly payments not to exceed 40% of income after payroll and family medical insurance deductions. Okay, in my opinion, unlikely a private lender would agree to these terms. So any loan would most likely need to be fully funded, held on the balance sheet, and administered by the city or other government entity. So that's just, and then the payments not to exceed 40% of income, the federal maximum, the state maximum is actually 35%. So that could actually come down, which is a good thing. And then my only question here would be, it's based, the proposal is that the repayment of a mortgage is based on the ability to pay. And my question is, would be what happens if the resident just decides they don't want to work anymore? How does that work? And so that's just a question that I have. So that's the proposal as I, pulled it point for point off of what was turned in. And my initial reaction obviously is I agree with the idea that housing needs to be more affordable for the workforce and many others. Just me personally, I've dedicated 15 years of my career to building affordable housing. So I completely agree with that. as I mentioned before, the defining characteristic of Temecula Housing's production story is the production of affordable housing that has been affordable to the workforce. Now that has obviously changed in recent years, especially over the last year. And I want to make sure that that's well documented and recognized. So I'll just leave it at that. And then, so some of the challenges in implementing the proposal, the state legislated strategy of targeting the deepest affordability units possible, i.e. the lowest income ranges, everything below 80% AMI, is a hindrance, because usually you have to have, you know, if you're going to look for a for sale product, it's in the 120% AMI range. Again, the SB 341 that restricted the city's ability to fund anything over 80% AMI, that's a huge challenge. And then, of course, I already mentioned that home ownership product of this sort is typically targeted at 120% AMI, which the city cannot fund with its RDA money. And finally, this would, so what does this mean? This means that the city would need to most likely find another funding source for a project like this, you know, potentially general fund dollars to be able to do something like this. We wouldn't be able to do it with redevelopment dollars, most likely. What's the immediate good news? I wanted to end on some good news. And that is the city is working with Habitat for Humanity, I already mentioned this, to complete Habitat 3, which is 6 units of for sale, owner occupied, targeted at moderate and some low income household. Now, that's exactly what I believe many of the commenters were looking for, was a subsidized for sale product. I know it's only 6 units, but you know, we have to do what we can. And right now, this is what we can do. The city can do this, and we are working hard to make that happen.
And who's to say who, you know, we don't say who is going to be in those 6 units other than the people. They have to be people who, you know, qualify.
That's right. They'd have to qualify.
So, you know, your chance is as good as somebody else's if you qualify.
That's right. So that's as best as I could do to present someone else's proposal. I hope I did an okay job. I hope I did a justified job for Ms. Lamont, and I'm sure we'll be talking later if I didn't. But I wanted to turn it over to the council for discussion and questions. That is the last section. I do have a slight conclusion that I would like to do. So Madam Mayor, do you want me to just go ahead and wrap it up and then turn it over to you, or do you want me to wait?
Council members, I do. I think you should go ahead.
Okay. So just in conclusion, we've covered a lot of topics. Don't need to go back over that. So where are we going from here? And I mentioned this in the beginning. This is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. We're on a journey now for a new housing element. I thought it was very important to cover some of the history of housing in Temecula, so we can know where we've been to know where we're going. And it's good timing. We have the housing element. We're doing the quality of life master plan.
Yeah.
We're doing public outreach galore. So there's going to be a lot of interaction between the staff and the community and the council and the commissions and everyone under the sun in our community over the next, really the next few months, next 6 months. So I just wanted to make a point of that. And this presentation really wasn't about future production, but I wanted to mention that there are many projects on the books that are going to produce huge numbers of units in the locations, Councilwoman Alexander, that we talked about, in Altair, in Uptown, in the Somers Bend area. And there is the potential in the discussion for mixed use redevelopment potentially of certain shopping centers. So I just wanted to make the point that while we talked about housing history today, mostly, there's a lot on the horizon. There's a lot of units that are going to be produced. And of course, increasing supply in some sense should bring down the cost of housing. So that's it. I'm available for any questions.
You did a great job, Luke. I mean, really, that answered so many questions, and I know for all of us, and we learned things that we probably didn't know before. So I hope it was as helpful for Mrs. Lamont and some of her neighbors. So any questions or comments? Zach.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Just I'll make a brief comment and then give my council colleagues the floor for a little while. Luke, I've dominated maybe a little bit, so
Oh, you're fine.
Luke, I just want to say thank you again. I mean, I think it's important just to acknowledge the time and effort put into that. Something I'd like to see, and if I can, Mr. City Manager, I'd like to see this online. I think it needs to be accessible. I don't think, sitting through this, watching this video afterwards, it's a long video, right? We want to give people an opportunity to see this information, to see this story, and to understand everything that has happened, that will happen, and that's going on currently. So if we can put that on our affordable housing website, I would certainly appreciate that. So thank you.
I think that's a great idea. Anybody else? Stu?
Well, that was the questions I was asking was really kind of, I think, where a lot of people were coming from, that that the city needs to step up and make affordable housing for people who work and live in Temecula. And I think the answer is we can't do that for legal reasons. And I do just want to encourage people who are looking at the prices of homes today and going, we're never going to be able to buy a house. Well, anybody who's lived in California long enough see this. So stick around. You know, if it's getting apartments are getting unaffordable, you know, hang in there, because you know the market does drop when it peaks. So and just like Luke was saying, the affordability factor, it does exist in Temecula, probably more so than any other place. And you know, there's the affordability factor in Menifee has gone up dramatically too. So that's I don't get discouraged, you know, when you see these spikes, because these spikes do take a downward trend most of the time. So that's my 2 cents.
I think that housing prices and gasoline value prices are somehow tied together. They seem to, they rise and fall at the same time. So anybody else? Matt? Yeah, I want to get you've been so quiet. I want to hear about your data interpretation. And I know Luke did an amazing job on information.
That was incredible. I'm gonna have to bring you in to lecture on some of my classes. No, it
wasn't an academic exercise,
right? So look, let me. I have 3 pages of notes that I put together. Actually 6. Oh, my lights just went up. Actually,
we have 20 minutes, and then we have to extend again.
So I'm gonna hit the highlights reel instead. And the good news is I serve on the affordable housing subcommittee. I'm not characterizing that properly, but Luke, I can always bring this forward in a detailed email later. But I wanted to say a few things, because I think, look, first of all, the housing crisis is real, right? But the way I see it, everybody points fingers at other folks and nobody takes responsibility. The state's response, in my mind, is that they've ever since I've moved to California, over 20 years ago now, the state has been ringing the bell on the housing crisis, screaming at the cities to respond to this emergency, but all at the same time passing some fairly ill-conceived legislation that throws gasoline on an already out of control fire, right? And I look at this and I'm like, how is passing more confusing laws and conflicting, how is this helping at all, right? It seems like some of this stuff should be a lot more simple, but we're not moving in that direction. We just complicate it more. The history report you gave, Luke, was incredibly valuable and very necessary, I think. And I appreciate everybody's patience, if you are still watching, for sticking through to this point. Especially when we consider that, the points that were made. Temecula only became a city at the inflection point of where the apparent housing crisis began.
Right.
And so our story is remarkably different than other cities, right? And that was demonstrated by some of the numbers. And so this was important, and it highlighted our story and it showed our challenges, but it also helps identify where our critical issues are. So really, bravo, Luke, on you and everybody else I know that put in a lot of time putting this together. to be certain, housing prices, and Stu, you said it, it's not just about location, right? And yeah, prices go up and down, but we also have to remember that California, in essence, has sort of priced its own self out of the market, right? The cost of construction, permitting, environmental review, all of that, and you even heard today the burden of fees outside of the city's own control, and MSHCP fees and other things. It will price projects into failure, right? And so why are houses so expensive? Everybody thinks, oh, well, it's because, the sun sets and rises on California shores. No, it's because it is just really difficult and overregulated to get things done here, and extremely expensive. So you start piling on burdens, and then you have regulatory agencies in the middle of a housing crisis, throwing on additional burdens and things, and it makes it impossible. And I think that became really clear to me when several years ago we put out the RFP. And I think it was Mike and I that sat on that subcommittee at the time to review all of the projects. And the city at the time, we put out a RFP to any affordable housing developer to build something in Temecula. And we said, look, we've got free land we can give to you. We've got, I think it was like $12 million at the time, roughly. To your projects, and we got a whole lot of applications in and a whole lot of nothing that could actually move forward, except Las Haciendas, Vine Creek, Habitat for Humanity 3. Finally, some winners emerged, but Luke, I don't even remember how many years we've been working on this stuff.
Forever.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, so this is not, and you think about it, here's a city saying we've got free land and $12 million, please build us something, right? And this is what happened, right? So imagine once that $12 million is gone, and once we don't have free land to give out anymore, how difficult this process is then going to become. So, so what do we do, right? You talked about a lot of the variety of bills and legislation that's out there. A lot of this is taking away local control, right? A lot of it has allowed developers to come in to any city or county and nearly have carte blanche access in a lot of respects to build affordable housing, right? It opened the gates, and yet you're still wondering, like, so where is that affordable housing? Like, where is, as all these bills passed and all of these, gold star solutions were created in Sacramento, what's the result of this, right? And some of these approaches simply haven't worked, and it's been unfortunate, right? But clearly, we've had some success. I don't know why my lights keep going off. Oh, everybody's lights just went off.
Oh yeah, it must be.
Is there a timer in City Hall that shuts all the lights
You have
off?
to get up and jump around.
No.
I'll take care of it. I got it.
All right.
We can still see you, by the way, except Luke, I can't see you.
All right.
Sure.
Anyway, so let me get to the point here is, how do we create more affordable housing? How do we create workforce housing? How do we do all the things that we're talking about here today? Because we all find it to be important, right? And how do we help Temecula families? Oh, there we go. How do we help Temecula families reach their own goals for, for their own, economic, satisfaction, right? I think Miss Lamont put forward a, like musical chairs, put forward a practical and pragmatic and sensible approach to workforce housing. I will definitely, I looked at the report. I think what she provided was good information, and I can't disagree with it. I think, Luke, you said that too. There's some stuff that was, very valuable there, but I'm not sure that practical and logical and reasonable solutions are something that California is always known for, right? So sadly. And so I don't think that stops us from trying to figure this out. Look, the system is clearly broken, and I still don't understand how massive amounts of new, confusing, and conflicting legislation fixes it. I mean, it's like tossing a shovel to somebody who's stuck in a well rather than a rope. Why are we doing this to ourselves?
We're California.
Because we're California. And so look, if there is an answer, I think we have to get creative, right? And that means we have to embrace new kinds of solutions, mixed use, ADUs, mini homes. There's a lot out there that have really changed the housing market over the last bunch of years. We have to recognize, there's actually 10 items here. Recognize that affordable doesn't just mean low income. We're
Right.
talking about families,
Right.
working families, senior citizens, veterans, special needs. And I think we do have to talk about inclusionary and not overlook our local need, which brings me to the next point. I know, Stu, you mentioned, and we've all had these conversations in the past before about how we just can't create preferential programs for Temecula residents. Why not? Right? I mean, really, let's, this is fun. Why not create programs, right? And I know, Peter, I can tell your, blood pressure is rising, even though your lights are more stable than ours. But, why can't we do that, right? I mean, here's the thing is, this, while the legislation is challenging for us, there are all sorts of pilot programs and things that get funded. RDA funds are gone. I don't expect them to return. We thought we saw some glimmers of that, over the last couple of sessions and things. I'm not seeing anything coming forward that's meaningful at this point. But there always seems to be money for pilot programs, right? And so we have, I think, incredible lobbying resources, unlike most cities. We have great relationships and we have remarkable talent, not just here at the city, but in, a lot of the relationships that we have as well. So let's put that to work, right? I mean, if you think about what we did on the I-15 corridor and the funding and grants and all that we went after, and everybody thought we were nuts, requesting $50 million in federal funds and going after tens of millions of dollars more in Caltrans funding and everything else. And yet we did it, right? Yeah. So, look, let's get creative here and explore pilot programs, work with folks like Habitat for Humanity and others, and tap into that same spirit, because I'm sure we can figure something out. But we also have to ensure that the programs we put together are not just meaningful in some way, but consequential, like it hits our targets, but also meets our local needs. And like I said, I think there's a way to figure that out. And we have to just start that conversation and start getting creative with it, because every city is struggling with the same issue, right? The other thing I'd mention, going back to Ms. Lamont's comments and others, we have to create ordinances and something that we need to start talking about that protect the integrity of affordable housing, not just existing, but future units. And I know that's a challenge, and I know it's not an easy thing to navigate that process. However, we have a responsibility to help protect vulnerable populations and make sure that they have a voice and an advocate. And I think the city can help figure that out. We shouldn't ever tolerate slumlords, right?
Oh, no.
And that's just, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily what's happening here, but the issues brought up at Warehouse are unacceptable. And there's a line between regulatory requirements and meeting those sort of minimum standards versus what's ethical or what's just simply human or what's right.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to forget that in these conversations. I understand that property is for sale. And I think that's, something we need to talk about internally. Because clearly, if they're not interested in this property and they've got one foot out the door, their interest in pursuing, these issues and things aggressively, I'm just not seeing it. And Luke, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I didn't hear that right, but I understand that property is for sale. Do you know if they are?
It's my understanding that it was for sale. I don't know if it's still for sale.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, something we should talk about. And then the last thing I would say is, as we start exploring all of this, don't forget we have the Ready Commission. And I think, their perspective is going to be incredibly important here as we start talking about a lot of the issues. And again, when we talk about Ready, it's, also that inclusionary perspective where we start talking about our local families and our homes and our veterans and our seniors and, first-time home buyers and all of that. And, so I think, look, I don't want to be overly optimistic about this because I realize the hurdles that we have in front of us and just even having this conversation. But, I think there's a willingness by the council, I hope, and an interest, by my colleagues. And I know, Luke, you guys have a remarkable team there to try and tackle some of this stuff. And Peter, it's going to be up to you to help us navigate the, legal issues while we're doing this. And let's put our resources to work and see if we can't start to, bite off some success here.
We have done some amazing things that were way outside the box
right? So
in other areas.
I think we could do it again. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Anyone else? Again, Luke, fabulous report. And oh, Jess, you got one?
Yeah, Zach, did you have something? I know you said you wanted to close out. I knew you got something, or?
Just closing remarks, but if you want to defer, that's fine. If you want to go ahead.
No, I'm just gonna kind of add something to the end. It's kind of similar, but not. So go ahead, take it off, because
Okay.
I knew you had something to say. So.
Thank you. So I wholeheartedly agree with Mayor Pro Tem Ron and the assessment of what's going on, what we can and can't do. Look, we can get creative. Like, we're Temecula. I mean, we can roll up our sleeves and we can do the hard work. And I sit on that subcommittee with you. And I know we're going to be bringing a lot of stuff forward in the future. Look, Mount San Jacinto's opening up a school here in our city. You could talk about student housing at the mall. You talk about a housing overlay for that property. I mean, there are so many opportunities. It's just about getting creative and sort of, let us not forget, bringing along the entire community. And we need to let folks know that that their single family home is not going to be raised and a fourplex plopped down next to them, right? That's not going to happen, right? So you read a lot of these things online and you think, oh my gosh, this is going to happen. And you go, well, that's just not true. We have the space, we have the ability to do some things, get creative, ADUs. And just the fact that we banned short-term rentals added to the housing stock. Again, let's not forget some of the things that we've done to add housing stock to our city. So look, I'm ready to do the work. We can certainly engage Habitat, Laurel Lamont and her group, and continue to move this forward to really just advocate and work for all the residents of our city. Because it really is everyone. I mean, it isn't, and I'm glad you pointed out, it's not just low income. I mean, these are professional jobs. There are people that are struggling, and we need to do the best we can. And I think we can always do better.
Jess?
Well, again, Luke, I just want to say thanks. I know everybody, it's a lot of work you put in. It was really interesting, especially being new on the council. I learned a lot today, and so I appreciate that information. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening in as well did. One of the things I just wanted to add, if I could, Mr. City Manager, is, having looked over the last couple months, not being able to look face to face with a lot of these people that are calling in, a lot of these moms who were saying, I'm struggling with a lot of these families that are struggling right now. I think seeing them face to face or being able to hear their voice and what they're going through is going to make a huge difference for this council to make movements on some things and for the city to have more of an understanding. So I'd like to see if we can put it on the agenda for the next meeting. If we can have a discussion about opening our meetings to the public and creating more of a face-to-face meetings at this point in time as we move forward. So if we can do that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. And we have talked about how soon we can get back in the chamber again. It is no fun sitting up here by yourself. We don't have that interaction between us. We can't read each other's body language. We can't make eye contact like we, usually do. I don't like it when the families split up. And so I'm really anxious to get back. And it also lets us get in touch with, our fellow neighbors and residents. And I miss that too. Some of the best meetings we have are when the council chambers are packed. So anything else? Really great job, Luke. Thank you. And that's going to be something that I'm going to refer to. That's the kind of document that you keep with you in the trunk of the car so you can refer to it when people ask questions, because they ask good questions. It's not really all that easy to understand sometimes why we can't do so many of these things. So this is just a receive and file, and consider it well received and much appreciated.
Thank you.
You're welcome.